Okay, it looks like we are live. So we'll get started. So welcome to Beyond the Comfort Zone Live, a show that helps you step out of your comfort zone into a place of growth and learning. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm Aviva Wolmer, and I'm a Vistage Chair in Atlanta, Georgia. I lead 3 groups of incredibly driven and ambitious CEOs who want to accelerate towards their goals faster, and a group of growth-minded key executives who are driven to transform the companies they work for. Our peer groups are a mastermind of CEOs or key executives who come together regularly to share ideas and experiences and support one another because they know that together they're going to achieve more than they would on their own. No matter how many years of experience a leader has, the reality is their knowledge and experience is capped by their own experience. They don't know what they don't know because they haven't been exposed to it yet. And a peer group and peer environment creates opportunities to see the unknown, be more proactive, and make better decisions. Today, I'm honored to have John Myrna with me from Myrna Associates as my guest. John is passionate about transforming companies and improving the competitiveness of America's small businesses by motivating every organization to leverage the power of strategic planning. Today, he and I are going to discuss how to turn your vision into reality through the magic of a well-facilitated strategic plan and process. And he'll give you some tidbits that you can use and integrate back into your organizations. Welcome, John. I'm so excited to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
I am going to put John and I's information in chat. So if you want to reach out to either of us, you can easily do so. And with that, let's get started. John, I'm going to just take us right into it. Why does every company need a strategic plan? What's the importance?
Yeah, if you're looking at being successful, you have to have finance, you have to have sales and marketing, you have to have operations. And underlying all of that is you need to have strategic management, where you move out of dealing with day-to-day transactions and look out to the future and where it is that you want to be as an organization, and then inform your day-to-day decision-making based on where it is that you want to be in the future. All successful companies ultimately develop a very effective strategic management process for themselves.
Is it something that is done yearly, quarterly? How does a planning process typically work?
Yeah, one of the confusions folks have is they think a strategic plan that lays out where you want to be in over the next 3 to 5 years is chiseled in stone tablets, and you meet once and then 5 years later you get back together. It's not the plan, it's the process. It's the process of getting together on a prescribed regular period, because what we're dealing with strategic planning are the things that are important, not necessarily urgent in a crisis type mode today. What we find is that when you start committing to an annual process where you close out last year's strategic plan, identify what you've learned, and then sort of rip it up, throw it away, and start with a blank sheet and build it back up based on the company you are today, the market that you're in today, and the resource and people that you have today, not to mention all of the insights that you've gained over the last 12 months. To keep the plan on track, usually the first few years, you set aside a day every quarter to take a look at the plan, to focus on the areas that you're having challenges with, to also get into the groove and the feeling for how you manage those strategic initiatives as opposed to your operational initiatives. Simply, strategic initiatives are about improving the value of the company. And they're focused on making things uh, creating the environment that you're going to be living with in 18 months, 3 years, 5 months. Operational management is about making sure you can make payroll this year. And so there are two different functions. Another thing that companies occasionally run into trouble with is they think that their strategic plan and the operational plan are the same. The operational plan, elements of it are informed by your strategic plan. They are two different entities, as is the meetings that support those two different plans.
So you separate out two different processes, one for strategic planning, one for operational planning, and same with the execution of the strategic plan versus the operational plan.
Absolutely. Operational plans, you meet weekly, you're laying out what are the main customer demands this week. Those type of meetings are well scripted. They have to end on time because people have made commitments to call customers and such. And it's really about focusing on the tactical steps that it takes, and looking at the budget and determining I'm ahead so I can move some of my investments up, or it's taking longer to bring some of those revenues in, so we have to defer or maybe permanently set aside for the year some of the items. Strategic planning is about working through some of the issues. The meeting needs to have an open-ended type of agenda. You may be dealing with an issue that's been troublesome for the organization for the last 3 or 4 years, and you're now, after an hour and a half of getting everybody to listen to each other and to work through, you don't want to have someone say, oh, I've got to leave right now. I've got tickets to the local musical. So your agenda for strategic meeting needs to be open-ended and people have blocks of time to work through issues. Your agenda for an operational meeting needs to be one where you end on time so people can make their commitments, their telephone calls, their myriad of other operational meetings.
Mm-hmm. So very focused strategic time. So one of the things that you hear very often, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, is that strategic plans must get created in the fall to have them launch in the new year and be very much on a normal annual cycle. Is that a true or false assumption on most people's part?
Having done this for 31 years for literally hundreds of different organizations and interacting with thousands of executives, the simple answer is no. It is false. We have had companies that say, well, I want to do this in the fall so that it informs the budget. I've also had companies that said, I want to do it in the summer so that it's clear to every employee, every one of my senior team, that this is a strategic meeting, not an operational meeting. And when two of them are done in the same time frames, people get confused. And I've seen both of them work. It's a lot about what your management philosophy is as a company. The key thing to keep in mind is that when you do the strategic planning, you want to make sure you have your key people in place. So you schedule it far enough in advance that people it doesn't interrupt their personal commitments to weddings and bar mitzvahs and what have you. And you get a commitment there. I think occasionally you get CEOs who don't think into the future, and they'll suddenly say, we need to do our strategic planning next week, and I want everybody there committed for the 2 days. That is so disruptive that the team doesn't necessarily, it puts a burden on the team. They don't necessarily put their mind into the heavy duty thinking that's required in a well facilitated strategic planning meeting.
So important to set dates in advance. You talk a lot about making sure that the team is present and involved. Why is team planning important? I mean, the CEO's got the vision. Shouldn't they just write kind of what they're thinking down?
You would think that that'd certainly be the most efficient way. And essentially almost most of the people on the senior team could write a great plan. The effort is not the plan. The effort is to implement. And for ownership, people own things that they've been involved in shaping. So the process of strategic planning is actually more important than the plan itself. I've worked with some companies that their operations are so chaotic that they don't spend a lot of time looking at the plan during the year. But when we do the annual update, they see how much they've accomplished because the process is, they've imbibed what the direction and the intent of the strategic plan. And that has done a reasonably good job of informing how they prioritize the day-to-day things. You write the plan as the CEO, you get up and you tell people, and you run into an issue. The senior execs will come back and say, Aviva, we're having this problem with your plan. What do you want us to do? When you've developed the plan together, the dialogue is very different. It's, Aviva, I'm having problem with my part of our plan. Can you help me think through some of the aspects there? And puts the CEO in that coaching role, which is so powerful versus the direction role and telling people how to do things. You're the coach to help them work through it.
Mm-hmm. Much more the empowering leader versus the micromanaging leader.
Exactly. And the adage that we hit over and over in our Vistage meetings, we want CEOs to be working on the business versus in the business. And if you're the person who writes the whole plan out, that's very much being in the business rather than working on the business. Now, I've had some CEOs who say, John, I'm terrified. What if the team comes up with the wrong plan? Well, having done this literally for close to 1,000 different sessions, the team never ends up with the wrong plan because you're a full participant. And the way in which we facilitate the meeting is we make sure that you understand your role is to shut up and listen and not fall into your normal mode of telling people the answer. So you always get to speak last. And if you're lucky, you'll never have anything to say because your team who's been listening to you and absorbing the direction that you've been setting will have said all the important things. And if they haven't, you'll be adding either a new nugget of information or clarifying a piece of direction that they will listen to. One of the big challenges for all CEOs is that they don't actually get heard because they generate so much noise. They're constantly providing a fire hose of suggestions, some of them as tactical as, I think you should add a little color to this budget report. And some of them as major as we need to open a manufacturing plant in Vietnam. But they all come out together, and what your team hears is blah, 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 blah. So in a well-facilitated plan, we reserve your voice so that it has tremendous impact and really validates and in many times sharpens the direction that the organization is going.
So you hold the CEO back to make sure basically that everybody is aligned and that the things that the CEO is sharing are different and unique from everybody else.
Absolutely. We have we spend the first couple of hours of strategic planning meetings setting the ground rules. We have 10 ground rules that are, rule number one is listen. And we have the individual members read the rules and explain what they think it means. And I typically ask a question, well, this is an interesting group. Which of those 10 rules will be the most difficult for this group to handle? So we get that set of rules that are designed, no cheap shots, no sacred cows, focus on solving problems, not placing blame or being defensive, and ending every discussion with a defined action that you're going to take. Don't let it just drift off into space. So that's half of it. The other is the roles. We have the role for the participants is that in every discussion, your role is to look at the business or the organization through the eyes of the CEO. You're not here representing yourself or your discipline or your people. This is a different kind of meeting. And you're being asked to act as an executive and to really think about what's best for the organization. And in my mind, that's the only true definition of an executive. Whenever an issue comes up, they first ask what's best for the organization, and then how do I align how we deal with that so that it's good for me and my people. And our role for the CEO is to act as a participant. And the discipline as facilitators is we always, as I say, make sure every other voice has been heard before the CEO gets to speak. And I've been in meetings where the CEO's side of the meeting table begins to vibrate violently because the idea of just listening as opposed to pontificating, excuse me, that's a snarl word, instead of sharing my years of brilliant wisdom, but the outcomes are so terribly powerful. The CEOs always end up thanking, and I've been in meetings where at the end, members have come up to me and say, John, this is the first time in the 10 years I've been here where I actually got to say something and to be heard and seen.
That honestly brings two follow-up things for me. One is just a curiosity. You mentioned your 10 roles that you go over and you ask the question, which one is this group going to struggle with the most, which I think is fabulous. I'm curious, is there what one gets named the most when you ask that question?
Remaining focused. That seems to be a popular one. We have, and strategic planning meetings are somewhat dry. So we have some visual aids and things. I have penalty flags made up like you see in football. And to enforce the rules, I empower every member of the team to take a penalty flag and throw it at the person who breaks the rules. And that adds a little bit of whimsy. And as I say, these penalty flags have been carefully constructed so they won't hurt for too long. So we have fun. And when I work in Europe, I have the little cards, the red card, and so I will red card people. So one of my favorite things is one of the rules is no cheap shots. And I asked the team why people do cheap shots, and we get all the standard answers. The key is a cheap shot is a tool used in a meeting. If it looks like instead of talking about one of these big issues, we're going to solve it, well, suddenly there are a couple of people who get a little frantic because when you start talking about a solution, what does that mean? They're going to have to take action. There's going to be accountability. There's a risk that maybe that solution won't happen. And there's a number of folks who are very happy to talk about issues, but they're really not so keen on actually solving them. And so one of the tools they use is it looks like we're coalescing on a solution. They throw out a cheap shot that pulls it apart. And you see this a lot in the political dialogue that we have, that when it looks like the two sides are beginning to zero in, someone who doesn't really want a solution, they much rather just talk about the issue, will make a cheap shot that then takes all the energy out of the talk. So we don't allow that in our meetings.
It's interesting because you create a framework basically through these roles and, of how to have these discussions in a more effective way. I love the focus ones. One of the things I've learned being a Vistage chair is many of my members don't realize that they're not alone. They feel they have their struggles, but they come to a meeting and they start to talk about something and like everyone's like, me too. So I asked that question about where you gave me the answer with focus, because I bet my viewers probably can all say, oh, I can relate to that too, right? Like, we're not unique in our businesses. We all face very similar challenges as we're trying to accomplish things. And focus is keeping people focused in a meeting is a big one. So it makes a lot of sense that came out.
One of the other one of the 10 rules that evokes discussion is the rule is silence means agreement. This is not one of those environments where you can play the game where you don't say anything and then 3 months from now you say, well, that was an interesting plan you guys put together, but I never really agreed with it. In a well-facilitated planning meeting, I'm sorry, the rule is you speak up if you have an issue, and if you don't speak up, that means you agree. Maybe not in all the details, but certainly in the spirit. Mm-hmm. And so we reinforce at the beginning of the meeting, as you say, to get that framework. We've had some clients who said, but we know how to do all this stuff, skip it. Save those 2 hours. We'd rather finish the meeting early. And what we've found is the quality of the meeting suffers dramatically. So, maybe after you're in the flow after 2 or 3 or 4 years, we don't put as much, we just put the posters up and remind people of what the rules are. But in those, that is a discipline that is essential for a successful meeting. The other thing is that you design a meeting so you reach agreement on the broad things, the 20-year vision, the 10-year mission, and so on. And so the progression is you reach agreement on the broader issue, the one that's further out in time, and you keep getting more narrow until when you leave, you've committed to the next 90 days of action. So you want to make sure that everybody is there for those discussions, that you don't have folks who say, well, I can't make the first day, I'll come in on the second, because that whole process of working down the funnel in time gets thrown out when somebody says, well, why do you think we have this mission? Where they're raising the bigger issues that you settled 4 hours or 5 hours ago. So again, what we say is we want people in a strategic meeting that are committed to be there for the full 2 days. And by being there, I mean that they're listening, they're truly there, they're seeing the other members and such. One of our rules is no lame ducks, because we put the planning team has got to be the group of people who have the insight about the company or the organization, but are going to have to live with the consequences of the decisions they made. And sometimes you get like a board member and he wants to push some fantastic thing he read about $1 billion company in Harvard Business Review or Wall Street Journal, but he's not going to be around to make it happen or to live with the consequences. And the same with the lame duck. Your great salesperson who is moving on to a different company, but is very is personal. Her personal agenda is to make sure that we don't launch anything that's going to reduce the profit that's going to generate her big bonus before she leaves the company. So no lame ducks.
One of the things I'm hearing from you is that the strategic planning committee, whoever is on that team, is not necessarily just the executives of the company. It could be other individuals. How do you advise a CEO put together that committee and pick who should be on it?
Yeah, we say your direct reports, the heads of the major functions, if they're not necessarily a direct report, and people who you feel you see, a couple of folks that either have some unique knowledge, maybe a sales rep that has a particular rapport and understanding of customer needs, or a technology person, or people who you see are going to become are good candidates to be members of the leadership group, the top leadership group. So this is an opportunity for them to get their eyesight from the tips of their shoes to begin to look at the horizon and begin to think like executives.
How many
Or
people?
a child who you're looking to ultimately hand the business down to, having them involved early. And what we find is in the first day, where we're talking about nitty gritty and stuff, they may not have as much to say, but when we move from the strategic down to the tactical, how to deal with, the action steps and things to be completed in the next 12 to 18 months, they light up, because that's the world that they come from and they're living in.
How many people should be on a team?
No fewer than 5. We find if you don't have 5 fingers in the business, you're not getting that core understanding. But I say typically no more than 12. Once the whole point of the planning process is everybody gets heard. And when you begin to move significantly beyond 12, instead of people listening to each other, they're practicing their speech for their slot to get and talk and be heard. And so the dynamic's very different. Now, teams that are very mature, I'm 13 or 14, I'm not going to get bent out of shape. But the idea that you're going to have 20 or 40 people doing strategic planning, it doesn't work. You need a team that's between that 5 and 12, and somewhere around 10 is almost perfect. Remember, the team is going to be driving the implementation. So if you only have 5 people or 6 people, you don't have as much understanding and energy available to actually lead the implementation. And I've given you the downside when you get above 12.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things you mentioned earlier was that people need to think of the whole company first versus their individual functional areas. Patrick Lencioni talks a lot about this, and I actually did a session with a couple of my groups, particularly my key executive group this past month, talking about 5 dysfunctions of a team and getting into this conversation a little bit. And I asked all of the key executives in the group, which team is their team? The leadership team or their functional team? Who do they think of as their team first? Because I was curious to do a quick survey, since these are those leaders. And they're very dedicated to their companies, very driven. I mean, there's a reason they're in my key executive group. And I would say 95% of them raised their hand that their functional team was who they considered first. And I share that because I think that is a common challenge, even within really great organizations, that key executives associate with that functional area first. So how do you get past that and get them thinking about the company first and shift that mindset?
Well, we set the ground rules, and we make sure that folks from all parts of the company, and as a facilitator, Like I remember we were in one of my meetings. We had the head of HR, who just stopped listening whenever there was not an HR discussion. And so I had, as a facilitator, I said, you're here because of your perceptions and insights and the diversity of opinion. And that only works if you're actually listening and you understand what the other parts of the company, what their challenges are, and contribute to that understanding. In this case, she was gone the next year because she just didn't have the mindset to be a senior leader. It's what we found is the rules, the roles, and being in an environment in which you probe deeper and you find people find out why. I know in the very first meeting I was in, which dates back, a millennium ago. Actually, it was July of 1976. I came in as a young engineer, and I did not trust salespeople. I thought they were, lying, obstreperous, obnoxious, and oleaginous sort of characters that had no moral. I'm beating it to death, but essentially, I had a fairly negative stereotype in my mind. Well, after going through the planning process and listening and engaging with the salespeople, I came to understand that they were passionate. They were as passionate about the success of the organization as I was. And I began to appreciate the fact that they were looking at it through a different lens. They as salespeople were concerned about the customer and the customer view and what had you. And I came out of that with much greater trust for the sales folks, and ultimately even made sure that I got formal sales training because I felt it would be necessary to be a very effective senior executive. It's the social engagement. I'm calling it social engagement, but the actual engagement over real issues. Also, I tend to push that we get mixed teams working on strategic goals. That we don't have them fall into the operational thing. Well, this is an HR goal, so the HR team will do it. This is an operations goal. That there's a mix of folks who end up being accountable, and in some cases, sort of the owner who's accountable for a new software system is maybe from the sales organization, and part of the team are the folks who are the implementers, so that you force this kind of understanding. I look at a meeting like this, one of my personal goals is to develop the team members. So I integrate in the process things where people need to get up and present the plan they put together, that everyone gets heard, that if someone is quiet, they get drawn up, that we use pauses and silence to give people time to maybe put their head together, that we have a mix of not only the 12-person or 10-person group, but we intermix that with parts of the process where we get 2- and 3-person groups to break off and have a more engaged discussion. Say, like, what are the 3 most important weaknesses of the organization, and getting 4 groups of 3 that do that, and then bringing those groups together and working out and asking questions. Why did you do this? And getting folks who normally don't get an opportunity to speak to maybe be the spokesperson for that smaller group, so that we're developing our senior team. The process itself is making a stronger organization for us. It's also an opportunity for the CEO to judge. And it's not uncommon in the early stages of a company where you provide a title to somebody and say, okay, you're the VP of marketing. And then you assume that they have all the skills and the insights as a VP of marketing. Well, one of the things that a good facilitated meeting does is it reveals how naked everybody is. You know, you ask the question and you don't accept superficial answers. You dive below the water surface and you dig in and say, okay, why? Why do you think this is true? Or if someone says, well, I don't know, you say, well, if you did know, what would you say?
One of my favorite lines.
You know, I stole that from Susan Scott. So the point is that a wealth, and I'm going to emphasize this again, and some people might think it's self-serving since our business is facilitating strategic management. You should always have a facilitator facilitate your strategic meetings. Now, you could use a service like ours, or you could get someone from your Vistage group who has a skill to come in and facilitate the meeting for you. But the point is that your participation, I'm talking to CEOs now, your participation is much too valuable to be wasted with the mechanics of watching everybody, keeping them on track, recognizing when a thread appears that you want to follow through and dig deeper, knowing when the conversation has milked as much as you can and begin to stop it. We have a poster in our meetings, and we give everyone in the meeting the opportunity to yell Gelmo. Gelmo. We picked this up from one of our clients. And Gelmo is an acronym for good enough, let's move on. Gelmo. And so everybody's empowered, you know, at a certain point where they think we've talked it through. Gelmo. And if the team agrees, then we move on.
Yeah, and I will echo that as just a tip for companies who do want to do strategic planning and really live in a process like this, that an outside facilitator is critical. I used to try to run a CEO, lesson learned from my own experience, some of my own meetings, and it's very challenging because you're trying to keep the meeting on track, facilitate, pay attention, listen to everybody, and you have your own perspective and agenda that somewhere still you do have to get out. It's great if you go last. I think that's an excellent thing you have your CEOs do, but you still can't manage all of those pieces effectively together. So I echo that. So you get a strategic.
There's also another piece of magic, Aviva. I can say exactly, almost word for word, what the CEO has been saying all year. And somehow, because I'm the outside expert, people listen. The other thing is I can be the son of a bitch. I can push somebody. I can keep drilling down as to why should we do this? Why do you think this? And so on. And then I go home. And so I can be a voice for the CEO, so that the key drilling and the key thing gets done, but without any damage from, you know, being obnoxious, if you will.
Yeah, very much so. So I want to kind of move on a little bit from the creation of the plan. Plans get created all the time through good processes, bad processes. And what I would say, or make a bet, is that a good majority of them get created and get put on a shelf somewhere, and then nothing's ever done with them. So how do you make sure that the teams and the people that you work with actually live their plans and execute it versus putting it away somewhere after it's created?
Well, the underlying thing is to internalize the concept of a huddle. So if you think about it, if you ever watch football, they have a
The wrong person.
yeah, they have a planning meeting at the end of every play. The team gets together. What do? They assess what's happened. They decide what they're going to do next. They assign roles. You're gonna block that son of a gun that's been keeping me from making the pass. You're going to go down to that end zone, and so on and so forth. And then they act. And that's the cycle. Assess, define the next steps, assign responsibility, and take action. And in the huddle, in a football game, is the shortest cycle. What we do in the strategic planning meeting is annually we assess how we did last year, and I think that's very key, is that we close out last year, because we don't want to put a layer of shellac on last year's plan, because we're not the same company. Our competition has gotten a year smarter. Our team is smarter, and we've learned an awful lot, both positive, what works and what doesn't work, by executing the plan. So we assess where we were and we close it out, and I have the team grade us alphabetically from A to F on each of the strategic initiatives. And then we decide what we're going to do. And we then have assignments. A key part of the plan is personal accountability. No part of the plan is the responsibility of everybody, or a nameless department, or 5 different people. There may be 5 people involved in implementing, but there needs to be one named accountable person. And then there's action.
Mm-hmm.
So how frequently we find, in a perfect world, once a month, whoever's accountable for the plan asks the question, who's having an issue? Is there a tactical issue that maybe you could get a little bit of help from the rest of the team in moving forward? That's a very short type of thing. Once a quarter, we recommend a full day review meeting that always starts by listing all the accomplishments. Because how do you maintain momentum? When you start by identifying the things you actually got done over the last quarter, that is what re-energizes, feeds the spirit, and maintains the momentum. So we start the review meeting that way. We then identify things that not accomplishments, and we drill down why. What was the consequence? And the consequence could have been, damn good thing we didn't do it, because it turned out not to be such a great idea. And then what are we going to do about it going forward? And then we update the 90-day action steps. And I'll talk a little bit about why 90 days. So we do that every quarter. And we recommend that you have for the first year or 2, you have those quarterly things professionally facilitated. For our client who we've been working with for 26 years, we do one review meeting mid-year. And then we do an annual meeting. And as I say, 26 years in a row, they continue to find that that's their guiding star. So let me talk a little. You ask another question, but somewhere in there, I'm going to. Okay, so let's see. We want to make sure.
I'll just ask you about the 90 days, because I know that's where you want to go from what you said.
Okay. What we've discovered, what I've discovered over years is, I mentioned several times that we've done this for over 200 different organizations. I mean different religious organizations, Academy Award-winning studios, the inventor of the popcorn machine, the inventor of the dental drill, manufacturers, political organizations. Anyway, and
Quite the family.
thousands of different executives. So we've seen the strategic thoughts across a wide spectrum. They give us tremendous input. And one of the things I like to say that makes us special, and I'll bring here Phil, my little groundhog, is that I've literally lived Groundhog Day, the same 2-day annual strategic planning meeting, day, week after week after month after year for 31 years. And it's part of our philosophy that we listen. And when suggestions have been made or people ask why something is being done the way it is, we adapt and understand deeper about the process. And so the program, which was fabulous when we started it, and that was based on years of running companies and doing corporate turnarounds, is now absolutely perfect. But still gets better every time we run another meeting. One of the things we found early on, we had people doing action planning for a year. And what we found is that the first quarterly review, people were on track, we made progress. But then the second quarterly review, everything had degraded down to, I'm going to continue doing what I was doing before. And what we can understand is that to be tactical, it has to have a window of 90 days. Because when you make a tactical step, it's based on what you've learned over the last 90 days and the resources you have available to you now. When you begin to lay out detailed tactical steps that are more than 90 days out, they're not really tactical anymore. Because by the time you get there, the tactical world has changed and you have different obligations and availability. Well, in thinking this through, we have 90 days for the action steps. Our strategic goals are to be done within 18 months. Mission is around, our strategy is sitting about a visualization of what you want the organization to look like 5 years out. Mission is 10 years, and the vision is 20 to 30. That's based on Jim Collins' model. Well, here's the deal. The vision is a generation out. People understand it's built into being human, a generation, the handoff between generations and the goals you set. 10 years is a traditional anniversary time where you rethink things. It's beginning of another decade. 5 years out, a half decade is another traditional point. Mary and I used to always go on a special anniversary trip to celebrate that 5-year milestone. 18 months is when a child begins to walk and there's a sense that they've made a transition from being an infant, whether it's an infant idea or an infant initiative. 90 a year, which is where our key result measures are key to. That's life, the circle around the sun, the anniversary and birthday. And 90 days is the season. You invest in an initiative and you harvest in 90 days. And so these are time frames that resonate at a deep level with us as human beings, having spent time on Earth with its solar cycle and such. And so when you can align the outcomes to these naturally occurring time frames, it works better.
Interesting. Never really thought about or associated most of those timeframes with the things you've labeled, but it makes a lot of sense.
Well, as a software developer, I also knew that any software project where the best delivery time frame was 9 months. You might wonder where that came from, But apparently that if you set a due date that's more than 9 months out, odds are it's not going to happen. 9 months is another one of those natural cycles that we as humans just naturally have an affinity for. But that's out of my strategic planning cycle. I just mentioned it.
That's interesting. Well, I mean, you're getting into some of the interesting tidbits that I was about to go and ask about, but I always like to ask, for my listeners, what are some secrets you've got for success? Just some quick tips of things that they can take away from, the session today. And
okay, well, first of all, is we talked about some of those. The makeup of the team. It's not a political thing. It says, well, I've been here 20 years. I should be on the strategic planning meeting. Well, if you don't have a strategic point of view, or you're heading up a major department. Second tip is the team should change over time, because the market changes, the size of the company changes things. Third tip is the most powerful part of your strategic plan, at least in the way we put it together, is a way to capture strategy. You and your team visualize a moment in time 5 years from now. How big, start with how big you want to be, not a projection, not a wild guess, but how big you want to be, how profitable you want to be, how many employees you want to support it, what's going to be the main markets that you're in 5 years from now. What are the main products that are going to generate the income? What's your strategy for technology, branding? Write it down on a single sheet of paper. And that statement shared and understood on a single sheet of paper where you can validate it easily by just reading through the bullet points. It communicates clearly. That is probably the most powerful part of the strategic side of your strategic plan. The other is we use a cloud-based Google shared file or Microsoft shared file where people can update and keep track of the accomplishments they've made and with personal accountability. The other thing is, if you're a CEO, accept the fact that everybody's going to be very skeptical about your strategic planning. So focus on making sure that you and your team implement and earn the right to begin to push it down through the organization by actually showing that this is not the flavor of the month, but that this is a process that you're committed to as a company. What else? The rules and roles, absolutely essential, and be free to waste time. If you're going to, by making sure that you reinforce the understanding of rules and roles. Location for the planning meeting. This is a working meeting, and intermixing social engagement. I mean, of the bring the family, we're going to go play golf. I'm not a big fan of that. This is hard work. We compress our planning meeting into 2 very intense days because we get the entire team into a state of flow where they have all the current issues in mind, so that when they go through focusing, there's not this a month later saying, well, did we talk about the need for profitability or additional capital, or we're running out of space or capacity? No, all those issues were clearly in mind when we laid out the plan for the coming year. So I think that meeting location has to be out of work, because when you're in work, there's a whole different mindset. And people, even though you tell them you're not available, they're going to come to the door and knock on the door and interrupt. And you need to
go find your team.
state of flow. And if you go to a resort in which the value is in playing golf and tennis and doing all those things, you're just wasting people's money, the company's money, because you're going to be consumed doing the planning. And if you bring along a spouse and children, they're going to be frustrated because you're not going to be there for them. If you want a social thing, do a social thing. And if you want to do a planning thing, do a planning thing.
Well, John, I appreciate all your tips and tricks and ideas around strategic planning and also just the importance of it. I'm going to ask you a completely non-strategic planning related question that I ask every guest I have. But since it's my title, what is something out of your comfort zone that you've never done before?
This is a little late because in the last year, that's all I've been doing is doing things outside of my comfort zone. Doing the social engagement is the most uncomfortable thing for me. I mean, whenever I went to a group meeting, it's as if the walls were magnetic and would pull me there, sitting in the corner. So one of the things that's on my list is becoming more able to interact with folks in a group environment. I mean, a social group environment, and learning how to do small talk versus explaining the origin of being hoisted on your own Picard, or where there's no such thing as a free lunch came from, which is, I end up talking about this stuff and it doesn't seem to really be socially charming.
Well, thank you for being open and vulnerable with us. And thank you so much for joining me today. It's truly been an honor to have you as a guest on the show. For everybody else, until next time on Beyond the Comfort Zone, I encourage all of you to try something new outside of your comfort zone, because that's where growth occurs and life begins. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.